Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are back. Um, Jesse Miller, how you doing, buddy?
Man, I am doing fantastic, except for the temperature. It's
I've
this
been
po this
I've been
polar
in Tampa
vortex
the
is
last
really
couple of days, and even Tampa is getting a bit of this cold breeze that I was expecting to get warmed up for a few days, and no, that's not been the case. It's been chilly.
we were down after IT Nation actually. I took a week, about 5 days with the family, and we just went to the beach. And it was, I think one day it was 39 degrees. I'm like, well, this isn't what we came down to Florida for.
Um, I can't believe we're at session six. This has been a fun year of this exciting conversation. I wanted to, before we get started here, just publicly thank you for your generosity of spirit, your constant knowledge bombs on every topic and every process and every little thing we've talked about. It's been so good. I hope the folks that have been following along since the first session, this is now our sixth one. I'll have a QR code up in a minute for anybody that's kind of just popping into this last one to grab all the previous sessions, all the previous resources. Because if you've been wondering, hey, how do I do this vCISO thing? This has been such a instrumental, foundational thing to go through for people to really get a grasp on how to get started. Yeah, so thanks, Jesse, man. It's been really, really cool.
Yeah, the pleasure has all been mine as part of this. I think when we got together and talked about this at the beginning or end of last year, I should say, and kind of went at this year, I loved the idea. And we were talking a bit before the session about how, I received actually a couple of notes along the way that of people saying, wow, this really helped me. This really got me in the right zone about how to figure out and get going with my vCISO program. And that means the world to me. So
That's awesome.
regardless of like we were saying about um, profit and selling your service and all that, like I get I get joy out of helping people succeed, and so being able to share some of that and you guys kind of creating the vehicle for that has been really cool.
That's awesome, man. Sophia Schramm, you've got your hand raised. Did you have a question? Throw it in the chat. Love questions before we even started. Signals great engagement, I think. So,
Misclick.
all right. We'll wait to see if, oh, missed click. Perfect. All right, let's get going. So once again, everybody, Jesse Miller, founder at Power PSA and runs this incredible peer-based execution system, I'm going to call it, because
That's a
that's
good
really
way to
what it
put it.
comes down to,
Yeah.
called the Power Grid. If you're needing a little bit of that peer support, that guidance, that friendly neighborhood watch, if you will, on getting some support as you launch your vCISO program, check out the Power Grid. Super powerful thing to be accompanied by folks doing the same thing, going through the same challenges, and figuring out things together. So appreciate you doing that. I'm Luis, Chief Evangelist here at ScalePad. It's been my pleasure to have Jesse on these sessions because he's been just so instrumental, so much good knowledge, great content, great resources. Here's a QR code and link for all the previous sessions we've done so far this year. As I mentioned, we're on session six already. The previous session, session five, we actually got into a bit of this cross-functional prep because one of the things that sometimes happens, and we were talking about this just as we were doing the prep for this session, is that people kind of get on these islands of operations. And so an MSP will be like, yeah, we need a vCISO thing. Let's hire a vCISO person. And they kind of hand them the thing and like, go do the thing. But there's so much cross-functional stuff that needs to happen. And so that was a great session. I love that we got to talk about that. Also, the piece about getting feedback from clients through the process, not making any assumptions about how you're doing, I think was so
Yeah.
powerful. So lots of good stuff in session five and all the previous sessions, honestly. So definitely check those out.
Yeah.
All right, today we're getting into a bit of the operate segment. It's kind of this last leg of once you have built some of these processes, some of these foundational things, how do you start really operating with this continuous improvement methodology and thinking about things like mindset, future-proofing the solution, the offering, the product catalog, if you will, and just figuring out how to way to stay agile through this entire change ecosystem. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of change that comes about trying to get a program like this off the ground. Jesse, you have probably seen this a million times, experienced it obviously firsthand yourself too, but tell me a little bit about this agility that's necessary once you get something off the ground.
Yeah, I think we love telling our clients, right, that this is an ongoing thing, and we forget about what that means for our service delivery and our product management. So specifically, when you build this service and you launch it and you start selling it to clients, you're going to be getting constant feedback. The industry is going to shift. Your clients' needs are going to shift. And if we don't have ways to build those changes into our service while keeping the wheels on, metaphorically, from a unified service delivery perspective, we're going to do one of two things. Either we're going to slowly age ourselves out, and before you know it, the service is going to fail, or we're going to slowly create dysfunction in our organization, and we're going to become oversubscribed and chaotic in the way we deliver service. So
Yeah.
it's very important to have this last piece and that constant improvement.
Yeah. So this has been quite literally the timeline of all the topics that we've covered as we got through the 6 sessions. So I definitely encourage you to go back and if maybe you thought this is great and you found yourself busy and then you had a false start. The cool thing is you can revisit these at any time. We'll keep that resource page up online, so you can go back and just figure out how to get that going. And by the way, if the power grid is the thing that you need to keep you accountable and honest to the process, definitely check that out. I think you'll find yourself in a much better place getting that help from Jesse and all the peers in there for sure.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
I was going to say that roadmap, that's the power grid design, right? So we've kind of mirrored what we're doing in the power grid from a Cliff's Notes version, right? But the fact is it's much more than just templates. It's the idea of having peers and live feedback and being able to ask questions as you go through that.
Definitely. Julie, who's been helping us out behind the scenes, if you don't mind actually dropping the session link or the previous resources link into the chat, that'd be awesome. Awesome. Well, let's get right into it because we're on this operate segment and we've been kind of doing a bit of a poll with every session to try and get a bit of the temperature in the room. So I hope you guys will indulge us here as we get this poll launched, vCISO 6 poll number 1 launch. We'd love to understand how you feel about this. I've been having this talk track just about MSP services in general. When I speak to peer groups and so on, I kind of ask this question: how would clients describe what you do as an MSP? But I'd love to get the people's lens on this question specifically around vCISO offering. If you are currently offering some kind of vCISO or some GRC or some compliance, how would your clients describe it?
Yeah, and I think for folks that are just joining me and like, well, I don't have a VC, so yeah, that's why I'm here. I would broaden this to cybersecurity. How would they describe your cybersecurity offering? Because I think that can be apropos as well.
Yeah, fair enough. So we're almost there. There's 71 folks in the call today, and only about half of you have answered. Come back to us. I know you might be multi-context switching at this time of day, but come back for a second, answer the poll so we can get at least 50% participation, and we'll share the results here briefly. I think this is one of the interesting things is that client perception of what we do sometimes needs to also shift. And this is a bit of this concept around the mindset shift. It's not just internally for the MSP that needs to drive a little bit of this change, but also clients need to understand what it's really about and not necessarily what we're going to get. All right, I'm going to end this poll. We got 55% response.
Let me
A
do my
few
best,
folks
Johnny
still
Carson.
answering. But let me go ahead and end this and I'll share the results here so you guys can see kind of where we're landing. And I wonder if Jesse feels like there's any big surprises here.
No, it's of course my background removed the piece of paper, but I was doing my best Johnny Carson. You remember that old Tonight Show, and he used to hold the paper up to his head. I was expecting what we're seeing is I think most clients would say they manage our security tools and systems design. I'm pleasantly surprised to see that a little under a third of the respondents said they would say they work intimately with our executive team to accelerate our business with security. So that's great to see that. And I think that
Yeah.
speaks to what we're about to talk about is the changing mindset and how customers and the market in general is viewing this.
Yeah, thanks for participating, folks. We only have one other poll a little bit later on, so we'll come back to that when it's time. So let's get into this mindset piece. And I think this is relevant because we have often had, as MSPs, a bit of like a tool-centric mindset around things,
Mm-hmm.
not so much a business process or a business outcomes or business needs mindset around these things.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what SMBs and mid-market enterprises actually are thinking about. And we kind of touched on this a little bit before, I think it was maybe session 3, session 4, but this concept of a project and a program was a really interesting conversation. I think MSPs, we have a tendency to think everything in terms of projects, beginning and an end. We present it that way, the GRC project, the compliance project. And then in the client's mind, I think they also inherit a bit of that. Oh, so when is it going to be finished? And by contrast, the program is a little bit more continuous in nature and design. And it's kind of interesting to position it that way because the client's going to need to do some work on their end too, whether it's standing up that little security committee to help make some decisions, move things forward, champion some of the needs, and so on, to just continuing the accountability on their side of the process because it is a team sport, as we know. But what's your thoughts on some of this, Jesse?
Well, this is really providential that I had a random conversation with a business or decision maker about this yesterday. So we just bought a used car. We upgraded from a small SUV to a larger SUV. I found it on Craigslist and went and bought the car from the guy. And talking to him at the bank doing the title transfer, it turns out that he's on the city council in one of the neighboring towns. And so he was talking to me. He's like, hey, I looked you up online. And I said, like, what's this vCISO thing? And so I watched one of your podcasts and he's like, after watching it, he's like, am I missing something? Like, why isn't everybody doing this? This seems to just only make sense. And this is a city council member. So he's like, do you know anybody that works with government and township facilities? And I'm like, yeah, I can recommend you to one of our Power Grid members, He's like, because we realize that we need this. And so it's interesting to see, even I want to talk about mid-market, but to see somebody from a local township and a government perspective, like thinking that way and being like, why hasn't anyone talked to me about this yet? So RIP his current provider if they're not making those conversations with them already. So to answer your question, I think that the market is waking up a little bit and being like, we are so overwhelmed with tools and everybody's shouting, you're going to get hacked, you're going to get this. We need clarity and we need a reasoned approach to how we think about and apply spend to protect ourselves in cybersecurity and risk management.
Yeah, I love that you said that approach is kind of like from the book of Stoicism to some extent. And I've been playing around with this concept of duty of care a little
Mm-hmm.
bit over the last couple weeks, kind of designing a presentation around it. And it just struck me that, the businesses, the MSPs, the MSSPs, like everybody in the entire supply chain has a duty of care on
Mm-hmm.
this. And I think so many people um, kind of just misconstrue it or conflate it with just, yeah, this is the thing we have to do. It's our job or whatever. But like the duty of it is so interesting to think about it from that perspective. And I think MSPs could really lean into that a little bit, not just the practicing side, but I think from a business perspective, one of the ideas that came out in this talk track is you don't want to be the good MSP that did nothing
Yeah.
from a perspective of duty of care. And I
Mm-hmm.
think likewise downstream, because most MSPs work with businesses who are serving end customers or other businesses, that business also has a duty of care to their customers. And I think this all really combines to change a bit of this thing from a mindset of IT problem or a checklist or the tool ownership or what have you to like, this is something we have to do. And so I love that concept of duty of care applied to this context for sure.
Yeah, and so we're talking about this mindset shift that's happening in the SMBs, and the anecdotal evidence I just gave for that. But now when we talk about what do we all want to do is move upstream to mid-market, where higher MRR, better customers to work with, ones who quote unquote get it. Well, we have to be prepared and show that we understand that perspective that you just mentioned about the ongoing program, the governance, the management, the stewardship of an approach to cybersecurity risk, if we want to be at the table and actually get those deals. So you're going to get walked right out the door if you don't understand that and aren't taking that kind of approach and speaking that language, so to speak, with these higher acumen customers, right?
I'm curious, Jesse, to ask you this question, maybe the audience as well. When I talk about customer success, for example, to MSPs, one of the things we talk about is, and I went out, did a deep research ChatGPT project to find MSP websites and tell me how they're advertising or proposing their services.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it out there is still, hey, we take technology off your hands so you can focus on your business. And it's kind of this like, hey, we take this over here and you keep doing your business thing over there. And in many ways, it's kind of like letting the clients abdicate their accountability for IT. It's
Right.
kind of the signal that it sends, right? And I think when it comes time to put a thing like this, like vCISO, like a compliance program in place,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of maybe that baggage even on the client side that exists
Yeah.
around just wanting to delegate it and not necessarily be a part of it. And this is what we see when MSPs just get a ticket with a insurance security checklist so that they can renew their insurance and they kind of not even thinking about being involved in the process. And so I'm curious how much this presents as a problem in standing up a program like a vCISO thing, and how do we solve it?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I would love to see a simple shift there, as in, we take IT off your hands. We help you wield technology as a weapon in the war against cyber, right? So that's a much better way to talk about it. But from the perspective of that, I think vCISO is specifically, and these governance, and whether you're doing vCIO or vCISO, we have to get better about talking in the way our customers talk and building value pillars that align directly with our customers' desires. Now, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole into like a sales discovery type of thing, but just thinking about this quickly, it's like, go ask your customers, what are the 3 to 4 goals you have for the business this year, and which of those feel hardest to achieve, which feel the easiest, and then put those in 2 buckets: want to do versus need to do. And you're going to get so much insight just from those questions that will allow you to design value pillars that says, okay, you are looking to grow through acquisition and hit this metric. Okay, well, how does the cybersecurity program support that? And I don't want to give too much of this away because we're going to get into this in future
Yeah.
slides. This actually rolls down into operations then as well, and how we build this future proofing program and how we operate and deliver the program. So it's important that we have this aligned value story throughout the customer journey. And so I think making sure your value pillars up front align with what your clients directly want, and then creating service outcomes for those.
Yeah, awesome. I was also going to be like, let me jump in, but we have some slides specifically on this coming up. So, delayed gratification. Um, the legal scrutiny and the regulatory scrutiny, I think, is worth bringing up as well because it's moving at a faster pace than before. Like when we were having this conversation, I don't know, 3 years ago, it was kind of, oh, like someday we'll get
Mm-hmm.
regulated into compliance of this stuff. But the pace has definitely picked up. At least that's my sense. I'm up in Canada. There's already signs written on the wall of the programs the government is introducing through compliance frameworks that are maybe going to become a requirement for all small businesses. They're kind of the signs are there, and we're seeing this already in lots of places in the U.S. as well. But what is your sense of that pace?
Well, I agree. I think we have in the US, we see HIPAA, which has traditionally been like kind of a joke. Like, as long as you have a list of things that you're going to get to at some point, you're fine from a HIPAA side of things. Well,
Yeah.
now they're starting to actually levy fines, and this has teeth. So there's a huge array of companies that are now saying, "Oh no, we need to get a plan for this," right? And a vCISO is like the perfect answer to now what HIPAA is requiring. Also, what some signals I'm seeing from partners in our community is CPA firms, which traditionally smaller CPA firms were, they just didn't care. You know, it was all about like penny pinching and making sure we get the lowest possible cost because, you know, they're bean counters by trade. That's what they do. Okay. So, however, we're having CPA firms, small CPA firms coming to MSPs being like, hey, this FTC thing, like, okay, we had one of our vendors tell us for $800 or $1,000, they'll write us a policy and we'll be compliant. But that doesn't sound right. We want to actually make sure that we have a defensible program and don't just put ourselves in a position of saying we're doing a bunch of things that we aren't actually doing. And so now we're seeing vCISO requirements and programs start to take off in that vertical. So two verticals, again, anecdotal evidence, but two verticals that traditionally were cared the least about cyber all of a sudden have this new appetite for governance and compliance as a service program.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just going to continue to speed up, I think. AI may actually be the thing that finally forces people to be thinking about this a little bit more comprehensively, because AI itself is moving
Yeah.
so fast that people are finding that they're like way behind. The legal debt or the regulatory debt
Yeah.
on some of these things is now really, really interesting. Um, I saw Australia just launched a thing prohibiting social media for any kids under 16, for example. So this is now law, which means that it's kind of like GDPR to a certain extent, where you're
Right.
going to have to make sure that you're not doing certain things in certain systems. All the platforms are going to have to be compliant with this type of regulatory requirement and so on. So I think these things are just going to continue speeding up.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the MSP mindset too. And I think this is an important part of this discussion because AI is kind of showing us how much action paralysis there is on the customer side
Yeah.
in the face of this rapid change. And it's not enough to just technically implement a project. I was talking about this on my LinkedIn post from Tuesday morning, the concept of zombie projects.
Love that, by the way.
Technically complete, but dead inside. You deployed the thing, and you kind of like, hey, this was our job to deploy the thing, but the customer did not adopt. And I
Mhm.
think when you look at a cybersecurity compliance program or a vCISO offering, it's kind of all about the adoption, right? Like you need the customer to come along for the
Yeah.
ride. And I think this requires a little change leadership. You got to be talking about the metrics by which you measure some of this stuff, specifically behaviors. And to be specific, it's not enough to say we're going to be compliant, by the end of the year. I think you have
Mhm.
to describe what behaviors are changing for people so that the what's in it for me question can be dealt with accordingly and
Right.
not just have a bunch of resistance inside of the client to this new set of things that need to be done. But what's your sense on, how MSPs are dealing with a bit of this change leadership thing coming in?
Well, yeah. So this is what I didn't want to give away. I started to go down this road when we were talking about this before, but um, I am a big believer in that OKRs, or objectives and key results, is a great framework to start thinking about how to do this. Now, for those of us that are using OKRs for goal setting in our internal MSPs or departments or whatever the case may be, that we may be a little bit ahead of the curve on this. If you're not familiar with OKRs, a great book to get started with it is Measure What Matters. It's an older one, but I think it really introduces the concept well. The point is that I remember when I talked about asking the client what their main goals are
Yeah.
and then what their metrics, how they're measuring those. Well, they have an objective and then they have key results for that. And then we create a waterfall style structure where what does our security program do? It supports those goals by having our own objectives. So we talked about the mergers and acquisitions, or the growth through acquiring companies. Well, if that's the company's goal, does our vCISO program then help create a process for due diligence as part of the sale, and then integration after the sale to make sure we don't get snake bit by anything from the incoming company? Now that's supporting that and making sure that that doesn't slow down. Again, one that I always bring up, this is was what back when I was a CISO at an MSP, we had a client who was doing this exact thing, and we proposed that and said, okay, this is what we need to do. So one of the incoming companies, we did a risk assessment. We said, okay, there's a lot of problems here. They don't have a lot of security controls. It's a dangerous environment. Don't connect them into your zero trust environment until we, help them improve. Well, after the acquisition, about a week later, ransomware completely deployed across this new company, right?
Mm.
But because we said that, we said, okay, they've already got laptops with the zero trust agents headed out that way. Take the old stuff, put it in the IR vault. Here's our process. We have an incident response process that we've built for you and all this stuff. SEC, I think, SEC, it was an SEC regulated company. So they needed to be, the report needs to happen. Here's what needs to happen. But the impact to the overall firm was negligible, right? So what does that look like if we didn't do that? Widespread ransomware across the entire customer base and the entire company, all because you didn't do that 12 hours of a step to make sure and connect that. So this is the kind of thing, and then we can tell that as a story for other clients, for this client, like proving value in spades from what they paid for a vCISO, which was at the time, I think $5 or $6 grand a month for that. So what did that save you as an organization? So right there, that's the OKR support for the organizational goals and how we're building that through the cybersecurity program. And for those of us in sales and marketing that are on this call, like the wheels are turning, right? This is how we talk about this. This goes into that value pillars, but it also then waterfalls into how we deliver the service and how we structure what we're doing for the client.
Yeah. And it's interesting how much of this conversation is what seems to be driving also this shift from secure, protected to more of a resilience mindset as well. Almost taking for granted that there will be an incident and that it's, what is on the ride of boom to help the business recover. So it goes from, 30 days of incident response, trying to get systems back online to maybe just a few days or what have you. And a
Continue
lot of
that
it is just
lateral
people,
release.
knowing exactly what's going to happen when the incident hits, and how the process is going to go. So I think this is super important. The jobs to be done piece, or sorry, before that, the MSP centricity moving to customer centricity. I think this is so interesting too, because from a customer success perspective, just generally speaking at the MSP level, we've seen the effects of the commoditization kind of start to really hit very hard.
Yeah.
And what this means is that if you have no way to differentiate, then you're only competing on price. And if there's no relationship and loyalty and retention of those customers, then you're only competing on price. And this is what drives a lot of these MSPs to the bottom. The irony is in the commoditization race, you're not able to price for strategy, which is super important in a vCISO offering to be able to price for strategy so you can actually deliver it. I'm constantly saying if you don't price for strategy, you won't deliver it. And we have this like interesting baggage of being a very tactical and technical type of MSP 15, 10, 20 years ago. And now suddenly needing to do strategy and not really have ever priced for it. The business models were not set up for strategic pricing. And so this is the shift and evolution that MSPs are going through. And this is exactly what vCISO requires as well, in my opinion. It's a shift to outcomes. You talk about this all the time. Pretty much every single post I see on LinkedIn is about don't price based on like time and materials. That's literally the old maximizer way of doing things, of like get utilization up because we can match up how much effort our people are putting into this thing if we charge this way. But the customers will never understand the relevance and the value that way. So
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's to that point. You don't ask Microsoft's how much code work went into an E3 license. You don't ask Zoom, how many sprints or people did it take to make this call happen. You look at the outcome that you get and you say, is this worth it for my business? And I'd say with VC, so you're taking that a step further and saying, we have to specialize, right, to make this work properly for all the reasons I just mentioned. And then we take the Peter Thiel approach or the Amazon approach and a really narrow market segment. Once we have that stood up, this is what, product management and how we build and how we iterate. Once we have that stood up and that's really working well, we just replicate that process out to another market segment. And it's just like printing money at that point because we have it so down to a process.
Yeah. A bit of what we were saying earlier of, somebody gets handed this vCISO project at the MSPs, like, go do this, and they're kind of on an island. This is a bit of this transition from jobs to be done to this cross-functional
Yeah.
acumen. We've talked a bunch about in the previous sessions all the prep that needs to happen on other teams to make sure it's supporting the offering, the
Mm-hmm.
product, the pricing, the packaging, so you can go to market and support this. And this is maybe also ties into a bit of that duty of care conversation. It's not just one person's job, it's kind of like an organizational motion, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, Tell me a little bit about this future of MSP as co-managed, because I feel like you brought this in for a reason.
Yeah, so this came from and it's funny, Chris Ryan, he runs vCIO University with Jim Taralla. They do a similar thing to what we're doing, but for vCIOs instead of vCISO programs. I mean, we kind of mind share a lot on different things. But he did this talk at IT Nation, and it's funny because he's like, I kind of looked at it as like a throwaway quote, but I'm like, no, that is so important. He said the future of MSP is co-managed. What do we mean by that? Is that as you talked about AI becomes more prominent, AI is beginning to be able to solve a lot of tier one issues, right? AI is starting to be, it's allowing us to expand what our tier one efficiency can do. So I don't think it's out of pocket to say that in a year or two, we're going to say one tier one technician can do the work of two if they're AI supercharged, right? So what does that mean though? It means customers are, if you can do this, your customers can do this as well. And so customers are going to say, do I really need a help desk when AI can kind of just fix that stuff for me? A buddy of mine here locally runs a dental practice, or I'm sorry, a skincare practice. He's got like 7 or 8 locations. And I always talk to him about MSP, and he goes, I don't have an MSP. He goes, I worked at an MSP in college. I kind of know what that means. I use Google Workspace. Everything's auto provisioned, and I have one IT guy. He's like, and everything runs flawlessly. So where does that guy get value from? He gets value from a strategist sitting down and helping him game plan how he wields technology as a weapon, right? And so that is where we're going as an industry. And that's only going to accelerate as AI, like I just saw something with Elon where he was talking about apps are going to be like Blockbuster Video in 5-10 years. Like you're not going to have an app. You're just going to ask AI to do something and it's going to build the code and do it right there for you. And that was kind of like the same thing happening here with tier one support. So all that to say is where's the human and where's the value from an MSP? It's as a strategist, right?
Yeah, 100%. The faster MSPs can get into that shift of mindset, I think, the sooner they can start capitalizing on that new requirement for sure.
This is what we mean when we say future proofing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's gone through cycles and phases, and we kind of come back around to making the shift, losing a bit of the efficiency, figuring out the process, becoming efficient again, steering the thing, making sure that you're getting the value, then kind of going through this rediscovery phase. Is this continuous deployment circle kind of explains a bit of the concept, but this shows up in so many places, not the least of which are these big strategic shifts or business model shifts and so on. So it's always interesting that when we talk about the next gen MSP, it always seems to indicate to some extent that it's really about the mindset of adopting the change, processing, evolving through it, and then continually iterating as you get better at that thing. It is interesting that this AI era will probably shed the most old ways MSPs, perhaps, because AI fluency is a big part of it. And some folks are just not feeling like they can keep up just with what AI can even do. And so we'll see what happens, I think. But this mindset is important. And MSPs are finding themselves like, I need to bring in some younger talent that can help us like stay on top of the change and help us lead through it internally from an inside out type of perspective. But this shows up in vCISO so much, and I think so much of deploying a program successfully is iterating through the changes and some of the discoveries that you make along the way.
Yeah, like some tactical application of what we're talking about, right? Is this discover, plan, execute, steer, approve, continuous deployment model. This is a very widely accepted industry kind of standard for how you build a continuous deployment approach. It started in software, but we're talking about using it in a service business as well. And when you get to that steer and prove point and that discover point, that's where I think a lot of MSPs fall down in terms of linking this. So tactically, how do we do this? Well, for example, I'll just leverage what I know in the power grid. We talk about in your renewals process. How do you do that yearly cadence with your customer where you build a yearly plan with those OKRs to the next year for the client and then link renewal to that? But also you're going to hear from the client what's important to them this year, right? And that needs to make its way back then into marketing and sales discovery and everything else. It needs to be a continual deployment process of those customer desires throughout our organization so that we can pivot and stay abreast of what our customers actually want and not be stale on our websites like we were just talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so important. And this same type of continuous improvement shows up in other places. We've been talking about how much of the customer success component of this is driving a bit of this mind shift overall. And we're seeing MSPs themselves talk about this out there, like just re-engaging with customers on getting them talking about their goals. Because if you understand the goals and you can value align to those goals, the customer themselves can connect the dots between the
Yep.
work that's being done, the solution that's being put in place, and the thing that they wanted out of the outcomes in the first place. And I use this expression all the time because this is important because people otherwise reject what they're told, but accept what they conclude. And so the challenge is always if you're constantly telling, oh, you got to do this because security, or you got to do this because this or that, and they have no way to understand what outcome they're getting from it, the rejection comes or the deferral or the delay comes. And so I think this value alignment is so important. And then obviously the execution and iteration piece is so key. In fact, you mentioned the VCI University guys, Chris Ryan and Jim Taralla, they use this expression all the time. They say data in, story out. And I think one
Yeah.
of the key pieces we forget to do through projects and things like that is what was the benefit to the client and how can we tell a story about that so they continue to see that value alignment. They can continue justifying their investments in some of these initiatives, and they see that their business outcomes are actually being dealt with to some extent. And so, data in, story out. Remember that because I think it's a key piece of how we drive
That's
that.
yeah. And I always tell Chris he's got a great way of condensing condensing topics into a statement. That's another example of that. The whole point of creating those business goals and those outcomes, I think, is pointing back to that, like you said, and saying, okay, this is what we did. This is how it helped your business. Now, how can we help your business going forward? Now, think about like the difference in dynamic to what you said about, selling security and saying you need this because you're going to get hacked. Think about the difference here. What if a customer came to you and said, hey, I just saw this. This looks really interesting. I think we should maybe think about doing this, or what do you think? Right. And it's a piece of technology or something. What's the instinct? Be like, oh yeah, we can tell them something.
Yeah.
Right. But what if you look at it and say, well, and you kind of reel them back in and you say, well, we talked about how your business goals are this, this, and this. This doesn't really contribute to that. And I think we could accomplish this by changing a process or by doing something with this tool that you already have. And it would be a much more cost-effective way to go about it. And I just don't see this as being effective for the spend. I mean,
I,
it's not going
I
to be any
was I
customer.
was following a conversation on one of the Signal groups where there's like a few hundred people in it, and Eric Bowles was telling a story that back in the day when he was doing a bunch of websites, he would win business because he'd be the only person to ask, why do you want a website? And everybody else was just constantly just trying to, shoehorn in their
Right.
website product or whatever. But he was asking the business question. He was asking, why do you want a website? And
Mhm.
it got the customers to think, or the prospects to think about what is the outcome that they're actually trying to get from the website. And
Yeah.
that just changes the conversation entirely. So powerful. This business discovery piece, it works. You can apply this growth loop inside of any one of those processes at any stage of the relationship or life cycle with the customer. And I think it can seriously change the dynamic of what has been maybe a very tactical and technical delivery of things in the past to try and get you out of that rut. So keep this in mind. Time for poll number 2. Let me pull this guy up. I hope we have folks still with us. So
Yeah,
let's launch.
I I think I wanted to mention this, so it's a perfect time for this poll, is that like all these things we're talking about need to be a documented process and a cadence and a motion, or it's never going to get done, right?
Yeah. All right. So here's poll number 2. What documented process do you have in place to future-proof your MSP? Um,
First one.
we may have been a little cheeky with the first one, but so I feel like we're getting some cheeky responses back just for, the shits and giggles.
And this is multiple choice, by the way, folks. So you can,
Yeah, it can be more than one on this one. Add AI to the website and call it innovation. I've been thinking about this AI run over the next little bit,
yeah.
and there will probably be an interesting market middle layer of just apps and tools, maybe delivering a smaller language model because, the big language models, I think, are not going to deal with a lot of the super specific or contextual things very well. So it'll be this interesting middle layer of apps that do small language models stuff. And then many MSPs will just be like, oh, there's all these products now on the shelf. I just could go and resell that. And I think this will bifurcate a bit of the MSP behavior back to kind of a VAR mindset, and then the consultative ones that are actually leaning into the consultative approach and process, the business discovery, and all this stuff. So I'm super interested to see how this all plays out.
It goes back to what you just said about Eric's question. Like,
Yeah,
your customer comes to you like, we need to do AI. Like, well, why do you want to do AI?
yeah.
What's the business outcome, right? I think shaping those conversations is a great place for a vCISO to chime in, right?
Interesting spread here. Capture the customer voice, got the highest response, and shape the strategy accordingly. I think this is interesting. This is, I would venture to say, not usually documented,
Yeah.
um, especially longer term things. I find that are not usually documented in terms of like a guiding principles
Mhm.
or constitution of the business, if you will. But more and more people are thinking about this
Yeah.
because they're kind of being forced to think in larger cycles of dealing with change. And I think that's the kind of stuff that leads down the path of thinking of strategies for 3-year and 5-year outlooks and such.
Yeah, I think this shows kind of what we were expecting to see is there's a pretty wide spread between the three, legitimate options here. And that speaks to like, is this something we're just like kind of talking about in leadership meetings? Because that's not my process, right? Is this like there's a specific way that we capture that customer voice, move it through to value pillars and planning, and then let it inform how we build our products for the next year, 3, 5 years, right? Is that a process and emotion that happens in our MSP? So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, would love to see those bars all go up to the right, past 75%.
Yeah, and for clarity, the first one was intended to be a little cheeky,
Yeah.
but I think the kind of serious question or statement behind the first one of just adding AI to the website, calling it innovation, is that it signals the need to actually go do that business discovery and have
Yeah.
that consultative approach for sure. Thanks for participating in that poll, folks. So how do you do this with vCISO? And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of getting into a program like this is that you're kind of piecemealing through the buildup,
Mhm.
um, and the focus and the priority kind of takes you away from thinking longer term sometimes about these things. And so, how do you think about doing this inside of the vCISO program? Walk me through some of these processes.
Yeah, I think the first thing, like, how do you do this with vCISO? I mean, another way you could say this is how do you ensure that your vCISO program is successful? And a question I always get almost without fail from MSPs looking to build this out is like, what's a successful MSP look like who's doing this right? And my answer is conviction. This is not something that you kind of go in half baked or 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And so what does that look like? I mean, I think you need to have somebody that's dedicated to the program. Now, that doesn't have to be a full-time employee as you get started, but you need to have somebody who is maybe sharing time or having time carved out. But what does that mean? That means the rest of the organization has to be on board with this. It has to be business development, and the sales team needs to say, hey, yeah, this is something that we see as valuable for our customers, and we're going to actually sell it, rather than what did we talk about, Luis, is, hiring somebody. What I see a lot is hiring like a high paid resource to like build this program out, but it's not connected with how we're actually going to market. So we spend all this time and money building this thing, but it's not actually actionable, and the organization doesn't understand it. And the other technical teams see it as a burden, right? And they don't see how it helps. So we don't build that connective tissue in the organization. We don't build that conviction in the
Yeah.
organization. We're going to fail. I don't care how much money you throw at it, right?
And to help you guys in this conviction process, I think it was session 2 or 3 where we had that role mapping spreadsheet.
Yep.
It's really intended to help identify what role should other teams be playing in actually offering and delivering this service organizationally. And I think the ultimate objective of that is actually getting accountability from those teams, those managers or department leads to put some results on their scorecard for doing those things in an accountable fashion. And not just saying, oh, let me know if you need anything, and hopefully that person doesn't get stuck, because then it is always a burden otherwise. So it kind of makes you rethink a bit of comp plans across the board to support some of these things. This is why this strategic view is so important. You got to kind of rethink a lot of these things.
And you have to look at the residual revenue that this is going to drive, because absolutely you will uncover opportunities, and you will be able to uncover new market motions where, when we go to talk to clients and we're just doing outreach and to say, hey, we're selling MSP services, and they're like, oh, I already have an MSP, the contract's not up for 2 years. Oh, okay, tell us, we'll call you back in 2 years, let us know. Or you could say, oh, that's great. Part of what we do that's different from other MSPs is we have this risk management program that typically complements your existing MSP. Would that be interesting? Right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've got a foot in the door, and obviously you're probably going to offset them once you get in there and expose that they're maybe not doing the best job with their services. So just things like that create so many more opportunities, right? And I think the question going back to this is like, how do you do this with vCISO? Like, it seems complicated. It's a highly skilled discipline, all those things. And I have a saying that the slide says here, standardize how you customize. We want to build all these processes in modular format, almost like modular programming, that we can plug in, right? And so when we start to think about future proofing and adjusting our offers and building our offers, if we're built in a modular way, we can not only have that cross-functional discipline where different team members can execute different pieces of the program and get the economies of scale from your more expensive paid resources, which are your vCISOs. We can also then, packaging and productization of the service becomes very easily as well, because we can plug in things as we get that feedback, right? So this is the way that we do it with vCISO. And I think it starts with going back to understanding who our ideal client profile is. And so that's where I'll start and say, going back, we have to understand those outcomes and speak to those for our client. And then we have to build service processes that meet those outcomes in a repeatable fashion, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the stakeholders piece is also important. Back to this, reeling back in the previously abdicated accountability. The stakeholders are so important. What's been your experience in maybe the cycles of variety there is with stakeholder engagement through the process?
Yeah, I think we have to, that has to be part of our onboarding cadence, right? Is like identifying those stakeholders and then building out what their OKRs. And this is why, again, I go back to OKRs. I think it's such a great way to structure this, is because the organization might have goals, and then you hear that from your decision makers, and then you get in and you find these stakeholders, and you kind of have to map out what their goals are and try and align those, right? Like, you're really performing a leadership exercise with the client. So understanding what those stakeholders are, what's important to them, and then even feeding that back into the system to build messaging that speaks to both in different ways. This is how we create that really modular program that can change as the market changes very easily, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's ultimately what leads to the conversation around cadences too.
Mhm.
The stakeholders are going to some extent, dictate what they're comfortable with, how much they can process at any given time.
Right.
And then you find, a place in the middle that satisfies the requirements of the outcomes, obviously. But this metrics conversation is so fascinating because it is such an easy thing or target to just be kind of focused on the reporting metrics and not necessarily the behavior metrics.
Right.
And I love this idea. You can't manage the results, you can only manage the behaviors. And this is an area where it's super important to think of both leading and lagging indicators. I
Hmm.
think the outcomes, the reports, and those types of things are ultimately those lagging indicators of the
Hmm.
results. But the leading indicators are the behaviors that you're helping people change or achieve or comply with as you're rolling out these programs internally with customers, that signal that you're going to get to the results.
Yeah.
So I think both are important. And this is a great place where, like the GPTs and co-pilots, you can say, hey, we're about to roll out this program with the customer. This is the layout of stakeholders and engagement and cadence and all this stuff.
Hmm.
I'd love to get a set of leading and lagging indicators, focus the leading indicators on behaviors that we need to get our stakeholders to be engaged with to ensure
Right.
the program's success over a
Right.
long period of time. And it's going to spit out some really insightful things so that you don't have to start from scratch. Again, use AI for some of these things. So powerful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's great advice. Yeah, I think just the last piece to that is that what are we reporting to who? That goes back to the modular standardize how you customize. So one thing we build out is like this whole kind of list of different things we could report on and how that costs in our program and how we deliver those, right? That contributes to our monthly, but then we have packages that rolls up to. But at the end of the day, that depends on our ICP. So what do they care about? Example of this. There's a company with a CTO. They do some internal app development, and he's kind of running technology strategy for the organization, right? So you're working, he's your contact. I'm pulling from an actual example of this. And he typically his strategic report for other executives, you might not get into this, but he actually wants to see the metrics on like what admin accounts are enabled, who has access to what, where are we at with this particular development project in terms of the pen test. Like he cares about all of those things. So you have to include the performance management metrics in your report with your quote unquote strategic contact. So they care about that. Now move over to a manufacturing company. Their executives couldn't care less about any of that stuff. So if that's your focus, then you need to have your packages include clarity and like, here's the risk, here's what we're doing. I need a yes or no decision based on the outcomes that you could
Yeah.
accept here. And so it's a much different type of conversation in those two environments. But and if you're asking someone to pivot between all that stuff, it's just not going to be scalable. So that's what I mean when focusing on who your ICP is and building out the really detailed stakeholder centric metrics that they want to see.
I was thinking about this the other day. I'll give folks an example of something that most MSPs are doing or should be doing, which is security awareness training. These reports often get kind of rolled into a QBR or sent out by email
Mhm.
and, email subject, security awareness training report type of thing. Um, if MSPs were to analyze the click open or the open click rates of those emails, it'd be interesting to compare it with a subject line that, for example, said, the three users most likely to get phished report. Uh, which version do you think the client is most likely to open and want to understand a behavioral problem over like this lagging metric report otherwise, right? And
Yeah.
so I don't know about you, but I was thinking, what would I click on? Which one would I open first? I want to know who are the three people most likely to get phished. I'd open that
Yep.
immediately.
Yep.
So I think thinking in terms of behavioral metrics is super powerful for the end customer to want to take action and get, past this action paralysis bit.
There's a lesson I talk about on this in terms of specifically focused on reporting and how to build that all out. But again, it goes back to the audience. Like you probably should use some performance metrics with your executives, but they should contribute to the story that you're telling that the executives need and want to hear. So again, they want to understand value from investment. That's one of the things they care about, especially if you're talking to a CFO, right? So if I say, okay, well, you paid for this security training program. You want to see the value you're getting from it. You had a click rate that was here and you're below the industry average. And now we implemented it, and your last phishing test, you're up here, and your risk has shrunk dramatically. And now you're above the industry average, meaning that your risk has gone down. So your potential loss has gone down. Now the CFO is like, oh yeah, I see a lot of value with why I paid for that security control. And so you're
Perfect.
using that data, but you're using it very specifically and at a high level to support the narrative and help them kind of see through the security to the business case.
So powerful, man. So powerful. These are the things about operating that I think people have to find their rhythm as well. Like every organization is going to be a little bit different. This is an area where having a bit of that peer group factor can be super helpful to make sure you don't feel alone through the process of designing these things. So it can be really powerful. I wanted to just briefly address this project versus program mentality. I talk about this interesting report. Verizon has this thing called the Verizon Payment Security Report. It's not their big breach report that a lot of people are familiar with, but they talk about this payment security report. And in this payment security report from 2023, they had dug into why is it that 70% of people that do PCI compliance the first year drop off the second year. 70% drop off rate, which is super, super massive. And so they started understanding that there were all these things about building programs that was so different than how people treat projects. And they kind of identified a bunch of stuff that causes programs to fail. And I thought this was super relevant to how we think about a vCISO program because all these, if you can literally apply every single one of these things to the vCISO context, and it fits right in.
Yeah, you're building a security program. So this specifically speaks to a PCI program, but what is a PCI program? Then a compliance and security program that's specifically tailored for a certain type of industry. Let's see how we're talking about this. But yeah, I think the tenets here are broadly applicable. So you look at neglecting to secure early stakeholder buy-in when establishing the compliance program. Something comes to mind of one of our members who just joined and said, hey, I'm signing up these mid-market clients now, and everything goes really well for the first 90 to 100 days. And then the program loses steam, and we just, it becomes like an exercise in monotony. And I know the client, I'm looking at churn now out after the first year. So how do we solve this? Well, we have to get that executive buy-in and that program buy-in up front. We talked about conviction on the MSP side. We need to help build conviction on the organizational side. And then how do we do that? You go down in that bullet point, failing to establish clear program objectives, focusing on compliance and not on effective data protection, right? So failing to establish the clear objectives for what this program is. It's one of our onboarding checklist and process is. We've done this in the sales process, but we want to align that then in onboarding to say, talking to our stakeholders and saying, okay, what do you expect from this program? So we can make sure that we're moving toward those outcomes. And that's how you build that stakeholder buy-in as part of this.
Yeah. So powerful. This is exactly, one of those wrong answers only opportunities. How do you build a security program? Wrong answers only. And I think you'd have a lot of the answers right here to ensure you avoid. And I think this is one of the challenges of not knowing what you don't know as you get started is you might go down the path of doing some of these things because there was no warning sign before driving to that dead end road. And I think it's good to know some of these things have been kind of proven out in market by big organization studying data, large data sets on why some of these programs fail. So hopefully this is helpful to some folks as you're thinking about what not to do as well. So let's last
We're
couple
running out
minutes
of
of
time. We knew this was going to
let's
happen.
try to bring this home. We always do this, but it's always worth it.
Yeah.
So Jesse, walk us through this stakeholder piece.
Yeah, we talked about this, right? But this is a more clear way, screenshot it or whatever the case may be. But so you need to map how does the organization make decisions, right? Hopefully we've done that as through some of our sales discovery, but that needs to make it through to service, right? This connective tissue that I talked about. But if we haven't, like service should go through and say, hey, the people that we're working with and their executives, how do they make decisions? And so we can understand how to navigate that politically and then identify the stakeholders, how they factor into this, what's important to them, elicit those goals and objectives, right? Map those out, create them, and do this in a meeting. Like this is what I talked about, the organizational planning meeting, like the typing it live with someone. Okay, does everyone agree with this? So I just heard this. Is this accurate? Right? I call it TCP communications, getting an ack
Yeah.
there. And then say, okay, yeah, we've all agreed on this now. Okay, now this is what we're going to do. Then categorize into need and want. I talked about those. It's a really powerful piece. You ask somebody that, they may not have even thought about it. They go, huh, that's interesting. Never thought about it that way. Right. But then it helps them own it and say that whole abdicate piece, like we'll handle your technology. No, now they're thinking about what's important to me and what do I need to do and what are my aspirational goals. And now they're going to help structure the program with you as a partner as part of that.
Yeah. So powerful. The cadences.
Um,
Um,
oh yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead. This is
Okay.
this is Jesse territory, straight up.
We're going to try and get through this. Yeah, again, I love thinking about how you do this in your own organization, right? Don't wedge vCISO and a cadence. I mentioned that one partner or that one MSP that has recently joined was having those issues. After digging in with them and understanding in our office hours, kind of like who the clients are and what they need, I'm like, I don't think you need to meet weekly. I think you can back off to a biweekly cadence, and that's going to there's going to actually be stuff to do. So what did you just do? You just got more efficient. You're actually proving more value to your clients. So simple things like that, understanding again who your clients are. Do they need that weekly, biweekly cadence, compliance led program, or is it more of like a manufacturing client that doesn't have regulatory but is concerned about making sure the lines are always running? Maybe we only need to meet once a month or once a quarter. Right size for the right client. And
Yeah.
then the reporting and operations is all part of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about the metrics quite a bit, but I'll just remind folks, think always about both leading and lagging indicators. The progress is really the behaviors. Are people gaining confidence through the process? And I think this is such an important part, especially if something that they beloved before, a spreadsheet or this or the other thing is changing. I think you have to always keep very tuned into the behaviors. And I love this. Don't conflate throughput with results. The fact that people are busy does not necessarily mean stuff is getting done. And so this is important to consider as part of the
That's
metric.
that's that weekly meeting versus monthly meeting thing, right? Just because we're
Yeah.
meeting weekly doesn't mean we're actually doing anything.
Absolutely. Listen to the music. I love this just as a way to wrap this up because part of the whole thing is really understanding what clients are saying and
Mhm.
using this feedback to go improve the program internally. Getting feedback from the service teams that are on service desk calls that are related to something with the compliance program and feeding that into the loop again. I think you got to start paying much more attention cross-functionally to some of these data points to properly improve the program. And then obviously reframe this in the context of the strategic goal for the whole program across all your teams.
AI has really given us tools to be able to capture this at a wide scale and condense it
Yeah.
and then boil it down for actionable stuff. So leverage those tools for these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, folks, we ran a little bit late. Of course, you can do this all at scale with Control Map. If you're not on Control Map already, we have a free edition. You can get started to do some stuff like HIPAA and CIS, and just understand, how cool the platform is. To get support and help as you launch a vCISO program inside of your organization, the Power Grid, such a great resource. I constantly hear great things for people in it, and I think you have a really cool set of folks there helping each other succeed through these. So
Yeah, thanks.
that's the Power Grid there. Thanks, folks, once again to Jesse. It's been amazing doing this whole series, having these great conversations. I hope this will be an evergreen resource for folks as they kind of figure out
Yeah.
the parts of this as they get launched. So thank
Yeah.
you again.
You bet. And I do want to reiterate that, guys, if you're we're more broadly aspirational here in today's final wrap up, right? Because we want you to start thinking about it this way. And there's more than we can really cover from a tactical perspective. But if you're looking to get started, go back and rewatch those and look at all the resources. We provide a bunch of free resources to help you actually get this going and get successful with it.
Yeah. Jesse, thank you so much again for your generosity of knowledge of spirit. Folks, it's been great having you. Reach out, like connect with us on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Tell us about your process and your journey. These are the types of things that we just need to start talking, putting out in the open, build in public. It's kind of fun to
Yes.
do that because you can get a lot of advice and help and just support along the way. So hope you'll engage. And if ever I can be of help with anything on some of this customer success stuff, I love chatting about that with teams. As you bring the rest of the organization into your vCISO program at large. So definitely engage us where necessary. And thanks again, everybody, for joining. Thanks to the team at ScalePad behind the scenes, helping with so much of the logistics. Julie, our designers, the marketing team, and so on have been great throughout this whole series. So thanks to everybody. The session 5 resource, aside from the deck, thanks for the question, Jeff. I don't believe we had any handouts for session 5. And so there's no resource included there. Some of the previous sessions did, and so we packaged those up and threw some into the resources page. But happy to follow up and make sure that we have at least the presentation as a resource packaged up, and we'll update that session 5 as well as session 6 shortly. So thanks, and we'll see everybody at the next one.
Been fun, everybody.
Ciao for now.